Most discussions about wrongful convictions begin with a simple assumption: a crime has occurred. The only question is who committed it. But some cases present a very different problem. What happens when investigators, experts, prosecutors and even courts become convinced that a crime has taken place when in reality no crime occurred at all? This week, we examine a lesser-known category of miscarriage of justice: manufactured crime. One that raises profound questions about evidence, expertise, institutional accountability and the way criminal narratives are created.
Welcome to Spoken Injustice, where we put the criminal justice system in the dock. As we mentioned last week, while we gradually build our new face, we have decided to spend some time connecting the dots on the issue of wrongful convictions by examining the themes and concerns that have emerged across our previous videos. Now, last week we focused on the most familiar type of miscarriages of justice, cases in which a genuine crime has been committed but the wrong person is convicted. This week, however, we turn our attention to a different and far less discussed category of wrongful convictions. Cases where there was no perpetrator because there was no crime. But before we continue, as you have probably noticed, we have reached another milestone. We can now count over 2,000 subscribers. Thank you so much, all of you who have subscribed to this channel. However, our analytics tell us that many of you have not subscribed. So if you could, it's free, please subscribe and help us with our mission to humanize the criminal justice system. Thank you. As we explained in our previous video, most wrongful convictions follow a recognizable pattern. A crime occurs, an innocent person is convicted, and the real perpetrator remains free. The Birmingham 6, the Guildford 4, the Cardiff 3, Andrew Markinson, Peter Sullivan, and the list can go on. All cases involving mistaken eyewitness identification, false confessions, flawed forensic evidence, or investigative tunnel vision. The tragedy in these cases is clear. A genuine crime has been committed, justice is denied to the victim, an innocent person pays the price, and the true offender remains at large. But there is another category of miscarriages of justice that is arguably even more troubling. These are cases in which central assumption underpinning the investigation is itself flawed. Cases where institutions, experts, investigators or prosecutors become convinced that a crime has occurred and proceed to search for a culprit, even though the events in question were never criminal in the first place. In such cases, the justice system is not just identifying the wrong offender, it is attempting to solve a crime that never happened. Deaths resulting from natural causes are reinterpreted as murder. System failures are transformed into allegations of fraud or theft. Accusations become evidence of deliberate wrongdoing. Ordinary events are reframed through a lens of criminality until a narrative of guilt begins to emerge. The result is a profoundly different kind of miscarriage of justice. There is no real perpetrator to find, no hidden offender whose eventual discovery can expose the mistake, no alternative suspect whose guilt can demonstrate the innocence of the accused. Instead, everyone involved becomes trapped within a false narrative built upon the mistaken belief that a crime occurred at all. Today we explore this lesser known but deeply consequential phenomenon, the manufacturing of crime. In these cases, the justice system does not simply convict the wrong person, it manufactures the crime itself. And arguably, these cases can be even more destructive because they create victims where none existed and force entire families into years or even decades of unnecessary suffering. It also creates an almost impossibility for the accused to set a line of defense. In fact, where in the classic miscarriage of justice, where a crime has occurred, there remains the possibility that new evidence will eventually identify the true perpetrator and expose the error, for example, a confession, DNA evidence. In manufactured crime cases, because no crime actually occurred, there is no real perpetrator to be found. There is no alternative suspect whose guilt can cast doubt on the conviction. There is no hidden offender whose DNA might one day emerge and prove the accused innocence. The accused is often placed in the impossible position of having to prove a negative, to demonstrate that an event interpreted as criminal was in reality an accident, a natural occurrence, a system failure, or a misunderstanding. Traditionally, wrongful convictions arise because investigators begin with a real crime. A murder has occurred, a robbery has taken place, a child has disappeared, public pressure mounts, the police face demands for answers, politicians demand action, the media demand arrests. Under those conditions, investigators sometimes develop tunnel vision. Evidence is interpreted through the lens of a preferred suspect. Alternative explanations are overlooked. Weak evidence becomes stronger in the retelling. Contradictory evidence is minimized. Eventually, an innocent person may be convicted. The system fails, but the crime itself was real. Manufactured crime cases are fundamentally different. Here, the investigation begins with an assumption that a crime occurred, yet that assumption itself is wrong. Manufactured crime is not simply a false allegation, although false allegations can certainly form part of the broader phenomenon of manufactured crime, and we will reflect on this later on. A manufactured crime is a situation in which ordinary events, natural events, accidents, administrative failures or technological failures are reinterpreted as criminal acts. The legal system then proceeds as if the crime were real. Evidence is gathered, suspects are identified, prosecutions are initiated, convictions are secured. Yet the underlying criminal act never existed. The system is not merely identifying the wrong offender, it is solving a crime that never happened. Perhaps the clearest modern example is the Post Office Horizon scandal. Sub-postmasters were accused of theft, fraud, false accounting because computer systems reported financial shortfalls. The assumption was simple: money is missing, therefore someone must have stolen it. But over time, evidence emerged suggesting the losses were the product of software errors rather than criminal conduct. The alleged crime was, in many cases, a technological illusion. Yet, once the narrative of theft became institutionalized, enormous effort was devoted not to question the existence of the crime, but to identify the culprit. The result was catastrophic. We have seen in many of our videos, careers were destroyed, families were shattered, some individuals were imprisoned, others took their own lives. And it took more than 2 decades before the full scale of the injustice began to emerge. The most disturbing aspect of the scandal is that investigators were trying to answer the wrong question. They were asking who stole the money when they should have been asking, was any money actually stolen at all? We discussed other examples of manufactured crimes in our video, The Art of Forensics. One of them was the case of Amanda Jenkinson, an intensive care nurse who was convicted after a patient's death was interpreted as deliberate harm. Years later, her conviction was overturned. The death was ultimately understood as resulting from natural causes rather than criminal conduct. Cases like this reveal another hidden victim of manufactured crime, the family of the deceased. Imagine losing a loved one. Initially, you believed their death was natural. Then authorities inform you that someone may have murdered them. Suddenly, your grief transforms. Anger and need for justice emerge. And you begin reconstructing the final days of a person's life through the lens of criminality. Then years later, you discover there was no murder, no malicious act, no hidden perpetrator. The story that reshaped your grief was false. The emotional damage compounds. You have effectively experienced 2 bereavements, the original loss and the collapse of the explanation you were given for that loss. In fact, this case belongs to a broader category of cases that experts have long warned present a heightened risk of wrongful convictions. The challenge arises because investigators are often confronted not only with uncertainty about who may be responsible for an alleged crime, but with a more fundamental question whether a crime occurred at all. This problem was highlighted by the Royal Statistical Society in a report published in 2022. We discussed this in a dedicated video linked in the description below. The report noted that cases involving healthcare professionals suspected of unlawfully killing patients are uniquely difficult to evaluate because they involve at least 2 distinct levels of uncertainty. In most murder investigations, there is little doubt that a homicide has occurred. The central task is identifying the person responsible. Well, in healthcare-related cases, investigators must first determine whether the death or medical incidents under scrutiny were the result of criminal acts in the first place, or whether they could plausibly be explained by natural causes, complication of illness, medical error, or other non-criminal factors. As the report observed, investigators must therefore answer 2 separate questions. First, did a homicide actually occur? And second, if it did, is the individual under suspicion responsible? The danger arises when these 2 questions become conflated and investigators begin searching for a perpetrator before establishing that a crime has even taken place. The Royal Statistical Society's report was prompted by growing concerns among statisticians and legal experts about the challenges these cases pose for the justice system. These investigations frequently rely upon statistical evidence, patterns of events, and interpretations of medical data that can be extraordinarily difficult to evaluate correctly, not only for jurors, but for lawyers, judges, and sometimes even experts themselves. The report warned that such evidence can easily become distorted by various forms of bias, both obvious and subtle, that arise during the investigative process. For example, once suspicion focuses on a particular healthcare professional, investigators may unconsciously begin selecting events that support the theory of guilt while overlooking events that contradict it. Clusters of deaths or medical incidents may appear significant when viewed retrospectively, even though similar patterns might emerge naturally within large healthcare systems. Statistical anomalies can be mistaken for proof of criminal behavior when they are in fact products of chance, incomplete data, or flawed assumptions. Recognizing these dangers, the Royal Statistical Society set out guidance aimed at minimizing the biases that can contaminate investigations and distort statistical evidence. The report also emphasized the importance of understanding both the strength and the limitation of statistical reasoning, warning against treating statistical patterns as substitutes for direct evidence of criminal conduct. Given these long-lasting concerns, one might assume that the lessons had already been learned. One might expect investigators, prosecutors, experts, and courts to exercise particular caution whenever confronted with allegations that a healthcare professional had deliberately harmed patients. Cases of this nature have repeatedly demonstrated the danger of confirmation bias, retrospective pattern finding, and the assumption that an unusual outcome must necessarily have a criminal explanation. It has happened in Holland, it has happened in Italy, yet despite these warnings, despite the guidance, and despite decades of experience demonstrating how easily such investigations can go wrong, the concerns identified by statisticians and legal experts remain highly relevant today. Indeed, with that background, one can argue that circumstances surrounding the conviction of Lucy Lebby should have prompted far greater scrutiny of the underlying assumptions before the case ever reached a courtroom. Our hope is that this case will ultimately serve a purpose beyond the tragedy and controversy that surround it. For the sake of the families, the medical professionals, Lucy Lebby and her family, and public confidence in the justice system itself, it should prompt a careful reassessment of how these uniquely complex cases are approached. Above all, it should provide an opportunity to bring greater clarity to an area of law where uncertainty can carry devastating consequences. Now, having painted the wider picture, we can now turn to the crucial question: how does the justice system come to convict people for crimes that never occurred in the first place? Usually not because large numbers of people deliberately conspire to frame innocent individuals. Instead, these cases often emerge from a dangerous combination of factors. Surprise, surprise. Institutional self-preservation, expert overconfidence, political pressure, media pressure, confirmation bias, For example, if a computer system cannot fail, discrepancies must be theft. If a medical expert cannot be wrong, a death must be murder. If an institution cannot admit error, somebody else must be blamed. Once those assumptions become embedded, evidence is interpreted to support them. The search for truth becomes a search for confirmation instead. Then the danger is that entire investigations become focused on proving guilt rather than determining whether a crime occurred. Modern justice systems increasingly depend on complex technologies, expert witnesses, statistical models, risk assessments, digital evidence. These tools can be extraordinarily valuable, but they also create new opportunities for manufactured crimes. When institutions place excessive trust in systems they do not fully understand, such as the post office did with the Horizon software, for example, errors can be mistaken for offenses. Data anomalies become evidence, system failures become fraud, natural events become criminal acts. In short, the defining characteristic of a manufactured crime is not how the process begins, but the fact that a criminal event is constructed where no criminal event actually happened. What matters is not the mechanisms, but the outcome. An ordinary event, an accident, natural occurrence, system failure or misunderstanding is transformed into an alleged crime. The path to that outcome can take many forms. At one end of the spectrum are deliberate fabrications, where a malicious accuser knowingly invents an offense and falsely implicates another person. These are the classic false allegations or false accusations cases. A second category involves mistaken fabrication, where no deception is intended. Instead, an allegation emerges from the fallibility of human memory, misperception, suggestion, or a genuine but mistaken interpretation of events. Witnesses may sincerely believe that a crime occurred, even when their recollection is inaccurate. Then there is expert fabrication, where flawed forensic theories, unreliable expert testimony, or incorrect medical interpretation transform innocent events into evidence of criminal conduct. Such cases can be particularly dangerous because they carry the authority of specialized knowledge and are therefore less likely to be challenged by investigators, lawyers, judges, or juries. A related category is institutional fabrication, where organizations faced with embarrassment, liability, or systemic failures seek explanations that shift responsibility onto individuals. The Post Office Horizon scandal provides a powerful example of how system errors can be reinterpreted as evidence of dishonesty and criminality. There is also statistical fabrication, in which patterns, clusters, or apparent anomalies are mistaken for proof of wrongdoing. Here, the misuse of probability or selective data analysis or retrospective pattern findings can create the illusion of criminal behavior where none exists. Finally, there is a political or moral fabrication, where conduct is retrospectively redefined as criminal or individuals become the target of legal action not because of compelling evidence of wrongdoing, but because broader political, ideological, or moral objectives create pressure to identify offenders and secure punishment. These categories differ in their causes, motivations, methods, but they share a common feature. In each case, the justice system comes to treat a non-criminal event as though it were a crime. The result is not merely the conviction of the wrong person, but the creation of a criminal narrative where no underlying criminal act existed in the first place. What unites all these cases is that they all transform a non-criminal event into an alleged crime. A false allegation is perhaps the simplest example. An individual claims that an assault took place when in reality it did not. The allegation creates the crime. The investigation that follows is therefore not an attempt to identify the perpetrator of a genuine offence, but an attempt to identify the perpetrator of an event that never occurred. However, the manufacturing of crime often occurs in far more complex and subtle ways. There may be no dishonest complainant and no deliberate fabrication. Instead, a series of assumptions gradually harden into accepted facts. A natural death becomes viewed as suspicious. A cluster of medical incidents is interpreted as evidence of murder. An accounting discrepancy caused by a software fault is treated as proof of theft. By the time the matter reaches court, the original question, whether a crime occurred at all, has often disappeared from view. This is what makes manufactured crime cases particularly dangerous. The investigation begins from an assumption of criminality rather than an established criminal act. Once that assumption takes hold, every subsequent stage of the process tends to focus on identifying a culprit rather than testing whether the underlying premise is correct. Viewed in this way, false allegations, flawed expert evidence, statistical errors, and institutional cover-ups are not separate phenomena. They are different routes leading to the same destination, the creation of a crime that never existed. Once society assumes criminality, powerful institutions begin moving in only one direction. Investigation searches for suspects, prosecutors build the cases, courts evaluate guilt, and all of this can happen without anyone questioning the original assumption that a crime happened. And when that happens, everyone becomes a victim. The accused, their families, the public, and also those believed they were victims waiting for justice to be done. But where a crime has been manufactured, the very concept of victimhood and justice become distorted. Justice can only exist where there is a genuine wrong to be righted and a genuine crime to be answered for. I hope you found this video interesting, and if so, as usual, like and share it. And also, if you have not done so already, please subscribe to our channel to help us in our mission to humanize the criminal justice system. Join us again as we sit and rise in this unique trial.